Hey folks, and welcome back to Sub 2 Investor. My name is Hans, and in this episode, I'm going to be talking about what it's like to take back a house that you've sold on a lease option or a contract for deed or some form of seller financing. What is it like to do that? How frequently does it happen? What are the negatives to this? What is the silver lining? Of course, we never want this to happen. We only go into these transactions with our buyers and tenant buyers with the intention that they're going to be there for the long term and that they're going to be the owner of the property. So whenever we get a property back, there's work involved, but there's a lot of complexity to it and a lot to talk about and discuss. So stay tuned. This will be an interesting one and you're not going to want to miss it. Welcome to my channel, guys. On this channel, I love talking about sub 2, seller financing, creative financing, and how to generate massive passive income using creative finance strategies. Sub 2's become popular in the last couple years. However, most people still don't buy properties sub 2. They're wholesaling them to long-term rental investors or other people who buy an occasional sub 2 deal here or there, but most investors still do not make sub 2 their business model, and they don't build their business on creative financing. There's a small niche of us in the real estate investing community that take this stuff super seriously and love it to death, and we really build our businesses around doing things creatively. That's what my channel is, that's what my business is, and I love buying both creatively and selling creatively because you just get maximum profit spreads on deals when you do so. Not to say that other business models don't work just as well. I think it really depends on your personality, your risk tolerance, and what your vision is for your business. For me, it's generating massive passive income. That means leveraging the best debt that I possibly can, ideally 2, 3, 4% interest rate loans, sub 2, and then arbitraging that interest rate and the equity spread on the deals, either selling on a lease option, lease purchase, contract for deed, wraparound mortgage. All of the above are really good mechanisms for generating that income passively. So what happens when you place a tenant buyer into one of your properties? Maybe it's a lease purchase, which is the same thing as a lease option, honestly. Maybe it's a rent-to-own deal, right? Where you have a lease that the tenant is on, but then that tenant also has an option to buy the property at the same time, known as a lease option. What happens when you get one of those back? Or perhaps it's a contract for deed or a wraparound mortgage. This is a different vehicle, really. It's actual seller financing, whereas a rent-to-own is still technically a rental. But we've gotten properties back in both scenarios, and now I've gotten back more than, I'd say, a handful of properties, enough to really be able to speak with some interesting things to say about it. I'd say on the whole, let's just begin with how frequently does this happen? Now, I have to admit, when I was younger, I was more ignorant and less experienced, and so I think the folks that I tend to place in my properties earlier on in this career of mine, which really has been, 4 or 5 years, not that long in the grand scheme of things, I tend to be not as picky and choosy about who I place. But I think that earlier on, we were probably less selective, and so the fact that I've gotten a few properties back now is indicative of that, and I hope that my ratio goes down as I get better at this whole creative finance game. So this does happen from time to time. I'd say 5 to 10% you could probably bank on of these kinds of deals are going to come back to you. Just a rough ballpark figure. Maybe just take 10% to be conservative. So if you're going to do 10 of these deals in a year, let's just say, bet on one of them coming back to you more than likely in a relatively short period of time. What are the circumstances in which you get properties back? Now, there's an infinitude of different kinds of circumstances, but typically what I have seen why somebody doesn't want to be in the house anymore is because something happens in their life. They have a life event, just like you see with motivated sellers. It's the exact same thing. Oftentimes it's going to be job transfer. I've had that happen. Or it's going to be a divorce. I've had that happen a couple times as well. Or they just don't really like the neighborhood. It wasn't what they thought it was going to be, and so they just want to move somewhere else. So all the things can happen. I haven't had a hostile buyer or tenant buyer really come at me yet. And that's been just a blessing. Most of the houses we've gotten back have been on amicable terms. Typically, we're not giving the deposit, shouldn't call it a deposit, the purchase option fee. We're not giving that back or the down payment back. We might do a cash for keys, which we have done on multiple occasions, but it's always amicable. And we're weighing really what's happened in these people's lives. Do they want to be there or do they not want to be there? And if they don't want to be there any longer, then are they willing to just surrender the property and sign a mutual release with us? If they are, if they can leave the property clean, then we might offer to give a little bit back from their down payment or purchase option fee, really depending on where the market is, what the condition of the property is, but they're certainly not getting the majority of that back. And that's part of the deal up front because we really want these folks to be owners. We want them to succeed and we want them to be in there long term if they so decide to choose to do so. Now, that's not to say that you're not going to get some hostile folks in there who are just resentful for whatever reason. I think a lot of that depends on how you do business going into these kinds of deals with your buyers and tenant buyers. Typically, I'm looking for people with whom I want to do business, just general good business practices. Like if you can see somebody either trying to sue you or getting really aggressive and angry at you and threatening you, usually you can see all that stuff ahead of time. And if you're getting those signals, well, then it's a good indication that they're probably not a great fit for this house that you're trying to sell creatively. So we have done cash for keys. We have gotten properties back without any expectation at all. Actually, we've just literally had the keys handed back to us, at least on a couple occasions. And then we get into the property. If we are going to give any money back, it's always contingent on the condition of the property. And like I said, it's always never going to be more than what we would spend if we had to, do an eviction or foreclosure or anything like that. So once we get the property back, we're going to get inside there, make an assessment of what needs to get done, and then turn it over and do the whole thing again. Let's stop and just ask for a second. What are the downsides to getting a property back on a lease option, lease purchase, contract for deed, wraparound mortgage? The main negatives, in my opinion, are that it can be a little emotionally involved and time consuming. I try and stay as emotionally detached as I possibly can and just keep it to business. But this is somebody's home. This is somebody's living situation, and it's involved for them. And so sometimes it can be involved for me, and I don't really like this part of this whole business. This is the least passive part of doing the business, to be honest. However, it doesn't have to be emotional at all. Usually you just try and keep things cordial, try and keep things in a good business tenor and tone. It can be a little involved. Maybe you want to take a visit over to the property, check on the condition. You need to get on the phone a couple times with your tenant buyer to figure out what's going on, to kind of feel them out. And so it can be a little bit time consuming, especially if, I guess the second point here is if there's damage to the property or if the residents didn't make any improvements or didn't take care of the property. Well, then you might have a little bit of a cash expense to have to recoup, not to mention holding expenses before you place a new buyer. And actually that kind of brings me to number 3, which is that there's debt liability. So assuming that there's an underlying mortgage on the property, you obviously have to pay that plus utilities and then any rehab and marketing costs to go find a new buyer. That can add up pretty quickly if you're not good or if you're not ready to go find another buyer. However, in my experience, typically we're always at least breaking even on a situation like this. I don't think we've had a situation where we've taken a property back and we've lost money on the deal. Like typically we're at least breaking even. Usually we're actually making a little bit more on a new down payment, because we can get somebody else in there pretty fast and get a new down payment and recover what we had put into it monetarily during this time that we're holding the property again. Those are the downsides to taking a property back, right? You're getting into this business to be passive, and then dang it, somebody has to leave and wants to give me the house back, and now I got to get back involved. That's kind of my gut reaction on these things. Like, dang it, this thing was cash flowing, everything was going well, and now I have to get involved again. But let's look on the bright side. And in my opinion, there's twice as many bright sides or upshots to getting a house back than there are downsides. Number one, it's like acquiring a new house. It's like getting a new acquisition, but you didn't have to do any marketing. You didn't have to spend any money on marketing, and you didn't have to go out and prospect and talk to a bunch of different sellers. Literally, it's right there in front of you. So number one, you are going to get a new down payment. So a new large cash transaction that's going to at least make you whole, if not put some money in the bank account or into savings for this property. If your average holding time while marketing to find a buyer is, let's just call it 3 months, well then just think about it. 3 months of holding time, maybe plus a little bit of a touch up or cleaning or clean out, maybe a little bit of a rehab. The average mortgage payment in my market, let's just call it $1,500. That might be on the high side. So let's just say 1,500 times 3 is 4,500. Plus, let's just call it $5,000 for a make ready, get in there, clean things up a little bit. Let's just call it $10,000 at the end of the day. Maybe a little bit more if I decide to give some cash to the former buyer. So maybe it's $12,000, maybe it's anywhere from, let's just say $10,000 to $15,000 on an average type deal where the house might be worth $250,000, something like that. So if I can get a $25,000 down payment, or let's just say it's an option fee of half that in the amount of $13,000, well then I've basically made all my money back during this holding time in which I don't have anybody in the house paying me rent. So number one, you get a new down payment. It's actually often an opportunity to bank a little bit more from that property. But then let's step back. There are some other certain things here which are bound to happen, right? So assuming you've been making your mortgage payments on the underlying debt, what's amazing here is that you've paid down the principal on the underlying mortgage of the house. So I would say that's number two. Now you owe less on that house than you did when you placed that buyer. What's crazy is that if this happens to you a couple or several times where you get the house back, and let's just say it happens again and then it happens again, what's crazy is that you might be 10 years into this deal and you've paid down the mortgage substantially. And not only that, let's go to number three. Market appreciation is bound to occur over a long period of time. Going back to that, let's just call it a 7 to 10 year time frame. 7 years in real estate is about a full market cycle on average. And I almost could guarantee you in almost every market, if you look at the values 10 years ago of any real estate piece of property, it's probably, I would place a bet on it, worth more now than it was 10 years ago. So you get all of the benefits of what long-term investors get, right? Which is pay down on the mortgage and market appreciation. In other words, your collateral, the property, if you're like a lender on this deal and you get the property back from a buyer, your collateral just went up in value, right? You've paid down the debt on it and the market appreciation has gone up. So while you might have to go in there, do a carpet and paint job, give your buyer a little bit of cash, have a little bit of holding time, you're likely going to get a better price, another down payment, and you have less debt liability on that house than you did before. Now, number four, and this is far less obvious to people because they are not in the mindset, and when I say people, I'm talking real estate investors, are not in the mindset of understanding the true power in seller financing. The true power in seller financing is in amortization. When I decide to sell a property on seller financing rather than rent it out long term to bet on that long-term appreciation, what I'm doing is I am trading long-term appreciation for amortization. Amortization is an amazing tool, which is basically how lenders make their money. They make their money on amortization. If amortization didn't exist, lending today as we know it would not exist. It just would look totally different. So what I'm talking about, guys, is when you place a new buyer in that house, let's just say it's 3 years after the folks have been there, or 2 years after your buyers have been in the property and moved out, you get to reset your amortization clock because your buyer, let's just say it's been 2 years, your buyer had began paying down their loan for 2 years, which means they're 2 years into the 30-year amortization schedule, which means they're starting to pay down their principal a little bit faster and a little bit more every single month and year that goes by. But when you take a property back and place a new buyer in there, you are beginning that amortization clock from day one when the buyer's principal paydown is the least on day one. And it only gets greater after that. But my point is that the spread gets bigger because you've been paying down the underlying debt on the house, right? So your principal balance has gone down. And now the market's likely appreciated. And when you place a new buyer in there, their amortization clock is beginning on day one. And so your profit spread on these deals is only going to go higher. In summary, it's actually a good thing to get a house back when it's given back to you amicably and peaceably. I'm sure there's scenarios in which it's just a terrible nightmare and you never want to deal with that house again and it sucks and you just kind of want to quit the business because it was a very difficult deal. I understand that. But that's probably going to be like 1 in 100 deals or something pretty minuscule. What's more likely to occur is you get a house back on good terms with your buyer. It's not a huge deal. You basically have a new acquisition. Market has appreciated, debt pay down has continued, and now you get to reset the amortization clock with a new buyer, get a new down payment, and it's actually pretty awesome. Guys, you've been holding this property, generating passive income from it, which was way easier than holding it with a rental, with a tenant nagging at you. Can you fix this? This is broken. I'm not going to pay rent because you're not coming by and repairing these items. Blah, 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 blah. If you've held rentals, you know what I'm talking about. You basically didn't have to deal with any of that stuff, and then you get to restart all over again. Once more, we never intend on getting a property back, and I never really want to get a property back. I just don't. I like receiving the mailbox money every single month. Just let it keep rolling in. However, it does happen. You do get properties back. And when that does happen, it's unfortunate that your cash flow suffers for a short while. All of a sudden, you have debt liability, which you have to pay, and you're not getting any income, right? And so that is a bummer. The cash flow goes up and down in this business, and it does take, I think, a robust portfolio of these kinds of deals to float you by in the midst of having a property or two coming back to you. I think you probably need, I don't know, I'd say somewhere in the realm of 20, 30, 40 these kinds of deals to be living off of, to be counting on that income, because you are going to be having a couple coming back to you every now and then. If you're trying to make passive income off of these kinds of deals and fund your life from like 10 deals, and then one of them or two of them comes back to you, and then all of a sudden you got $3,000 of debt liability and your cash flow goes from, let's say, $3,000 a month down to like zero because you got this debt liability with no income, that's not going to work out well for you. But if you're able to establish a portfolio of, like I said, 20, 30, 40, 50 of these kinds of deals, then I think you're going to be okay. You're going to float by as long as you take action on those properties you get back immediately and get them reperforming with the new buyers or tenant buyers. It's actually going to be very positive, and you're just going to do better and better and better as time goes on. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe, leave me a comment and let me know what you found interesting, what you want to know more about. Reach out to me if you have questions or if you're interested in any of my products online. I got paperwork packages, I got coaching products, sub2investor.com. Until next time, stay creative. Peace.